You know, for years, we've all thought of Apple as the undisputed king of consumer tech, a company just defined by its polish, its incredible foresight, and of course, its absolute control over its products. But in this new race for AI dominance, the king is suddenly looking, well, vulnerable. And the story of how they got here is one of the most surprising twists in modern tech.
So, this is the big question, right? It's on everyone's mind. How could Apple, with more resources and brilliant engineers than almost anyone on the planet, fall so far behind in the one area that seems to define our future? Well, the answer isn't just about code, it's about culture, it's about pride, and it's about a very unlikely partnership that could reshape the entire tech landscape.
Yep, that's right. The one company that Apple has been battling for control of the mobile world for more than a decade might just be its savior. And to really understand how we got to this pretty unthinkable moment, we need to break down a deal that was born from pure necessity.
When this news first broke from Bloomberg, it really sent a jolt through the industry. Apple, the company that is fiercely independent, the creator of its own hardware and software, is apparently in talks to license Google's generative AI model Gemini to be the new brain behind Siri. It's a quiet admission of a problem that, frankly, they just can't hide anymore.
And this right here, this shows you the problem so clearly. On the left, you've got Siri's typical response, basically just a list of links it hopes might be helpful. On the right, you get a direct, contextual answer from a modern AI like Gemini. This performance gap, this is the core reason we're even having this conversation.
It's actually easy to forget that Siri was a pioneer. I mean, it was revolutionary. But since the mid-2010s, it's been consistently outmaneuvered by Google Assistant. And then, when ChatGPT launched in late 2022, that slow decline turned into an absolute freefall. The icon pretty much became a punchline.
This timeline really puts the whole crisis in perspective. In late 2023, Apple was publicly saying, "Don't worry, we've got this." But behind the scenes, a completely different story was unfolding. The much-hyped Apple Intelligence turned out to be a bit of a phantom, with all these promised features just never materializing. And then the departure of key talent in mid-2025 was the final signal that things were going seriously wrong.
And nothing captures that internal pressure quite like this quote. This was reportedly said by a senior director during an internal meeting, and it is just so raw and revealing. You can feel the immense frustration of a team that knew they had overpromised and were completely failing to deliver. This wasn't just a technical problem. It was a full-blown crisis of morale.
So, what was really going on behind that famous curtain of secrecy? Well, it sounds like a perfect storm of internal conflict. Rival teams were reportedly fighting each other for resources, and progress was just painfully slow. But the root of the problem was much deeper. It was philosophical. See, the core issue was this. Apple's culture of perfection, the very thing that makes its products so great, became its biggest obstacle. Generative AI is, by its nature, messy and unpredictable. It needs to learn and iterate out in the open. And that philosophy is in direct opposition to Apple's rigid process of only shipping flawless products. The result? Paralysis, finger-pointing, and a product that just wasn't ready.
And all of that brings us right back to the Google deal. With their internal efforts completely stalled and the pressure just mounting every day, Apple did what was once unthinkable. They looked outside for a solution. This wasn't just some strategic choice, it was a move they had to make to bridge a massive capability gap.
And this table lays out just how vast that gap really is. Apple's own model is estimated to have around 150 billion parameters. Now, think of parameters as individual connections in a brain. The more you have, the more complex and nuanced your thoughts can be. The custom version of Gemini that Apple would use has 1.2 trillion parameters. That is nearly 8 times more powerful. Apple isn't just buying a feature, they're buying a generational leap in power. The price tag for making this leap is reportedly a staggering $1 billion a year. Just let that sink in for a moment. That sounds like an astronomical sum, right? A clear signal of just how urgent this whole situation is for Apple. But it's really crucial to see this number in its full context. Because Google already pays Apple around $18 billion every year just to be the default search engine on the iPhone. When you look at it that way, the whole picture changes. Apple is essentially using a small fraction of the money Google already gives them to rent Google's AI technology. It's less of a cost and more of a strategic reallocation inside an existing massive partnership.
Of course, the immediate question is privacy. Apple has built its entire brand on protecting your data, while Google's business model is, well, it's built on using it. So how do they square that circle?
The solution is actually pretty elegant. Apple plans to run Gemini on its own servers using its own custom silicon. This basically creates a secure sandbox, allowing them to use Google's power without compromising their core privacy principles.
Okay, so let's zoom out. It's really easy to frame this whole thing as an embarrassing failure for Apple. But there's another way to look at it. What if this isn't a failure at all, but actually a really shrewd recognition of where the market is actually heading?
Look at this data. When you ask people why they upgrade their phones, only 11% say it's for AI features. They care way more about battery life, the camera, and the price. So for all the industry hype, it seems most consumers aren't really convinced that on-device AI is a must-have feature yet. Apple might just be betting that a good enough AI is all they really need for now.
This leads to a really powerful analogy. Think of these huge foundational AI models like an operating system. In this new world, you don't actually have to build the OS to create the killer app. Apple has always excelled at creating the best user experience. That's the application layer. So maybe their strategy is to let others build the complex, expensive OS, and they can focus on what they do best, building a seamless and delightful experience right on top of it.
So ultimately, Apple's move, whether it was born of failure or foresight, could signal a massive shift for the entire industry. It suggests that maybe the real innovation won't be in who builds the biggest AI model, but in who finds the most creative and useful ways to apply them in our lives.
And that leaves us with the central question. Is this a moment of humiliation for Apple? A public admission that they just couldn't compete? Or is it a brilliant, pragmatic pivot that lets them bypass an expensive race they were already losing so they can focus instead on winning the war for the user experience? The answer to that question will likely define the next decade of technology.